The Magnificent Seven. The teams pushing for either the ACC to be dissolved or for unequal revenue distribution. Let's go ahead and dive into this. It was reported by Ross Dellinger at Sports Illustrated on Monday, before ACC spring meetings began, that over the past few months, several ACC schools have come together with their legal teams to thoroughly analyze the grant of rights agreement, basically trying to figure out if they can get out of it or if they can push for merit-based revenue distribution. The ACC deal with ESPN is in effect until 2036, so they still got 13 more years of this. Brett McMurphy with the Action Network reported that the schools are Clemson, Florida State, Miami, North Carolina, NC State, Virginia, and Virginia Tech. Now, the ACC reportedly requires a majority to dissolve the grant of rights. That would be 8 schools. So, basically one more than these 7. If that happens, the penalty for schools to leave and join other conferences is still $120 million. But if you look at the math, there's 13 years left on the ESPN deal, and in the grant of rights, and if they're going to be $30 million behind SEC and Big Ten schools annually, that $120 million would be made up within 4 years. 4 years versus 13, I think it makes sense. Now, we've heard the Clemson and Florida State ADs talking about how they need unequal revenue distribution in the ACC in order to be able to keep up on a national level with their peers. Not the other schools in the conference, but with schools like Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, Michigan, etc. Right now, the growing revenue gap could leave them $30 million a year behind the SEC and Big Ten in annual distribution by 2026, which coincidentally would be the first year of the newest college football playoff contract, which honestly hasn't been negotiated yet. So let's get through the basics of the grant of rights. Okay, Ross Dellinger's article at SI, it's titled Expansion, Realignment, and What's at Stake for Power 5 Conferences. It states this: per the grant of rights, each ACC school gives ownership of its broadcasting rights to the league in a deal with ESPN that runs through 2036. If a school breaks the deal, the ACC will continue to own the TV rights of any of that school's home games according to the contract. That's not good. If you're wanting to leave to go to the Big Ten, you got 13 more years where your home games are going to be owned by ESPN, no matter what. So let's look at the options that Dellinger laid out for the schools that could be interested in potentially dissolving this grant of rights. Number 1, seek additional revenue from ESPN. Number 2, secede from the league. Number 3, create another league. Number 4, change the revenue distribution model to be more merit-based. Now, we'll tackle these piece by piece. The additional revenue from ESPN. As we've seen with the Pac-12 negotiations, that does not appear likely. ESPN is in a weird spot right now, and with NBA, UFC, WWE, the new college football playoff rights all coming up, they are not likely going to be willing to spend additional money on something that they've already got under contract at what's effectively a sweetheart deal for them, right? The next is to pay the $120 million exit fee, find a way to break the airtight grant of rights, and then secede from the league. But where do all of those schools go? We're talking about 8 schools that would have to sign this. Now, I've said in the past, even if these schools did find a way to get out, there are only a few that would add value to the Big Ten and the SEC. North Carolina is the big one. I think that both of those leagues, Big Ten and SEC, would want North Carolina. Obviously, Clemson and Florida State do bring in big value, but they're both in states in which the SEC already has a brand. So does the Big Ten want to bring in those two and then stretch their existing travel all the way to the South? This is not just about football, so let's not forget about that. The third is to create another league, okay? If 8 decided to dissolve the grant of rights and only a few joined the Big Ten and SEC, then what happens to the rest? Or what if they dissolve the rights in order to get rid of the dead weight in the conference? Like, we'll talk more about that and some potential options in another segment. Finally, the fourth option is the one that, from the most recent reports, appears to have happened now, and that is changing the revenue distribution model. Florida State, Clemson, etc., all believe that they should be making more than everyone else in the conference because of their success, their TV ratings, all sorts of things. And don't get me wrong, they certainly bring in more eyeballs, but by doing this, as Pat Forty said, you're poisoning the conference. No, not everybody is an equal, and I get it, that's life. but it makes it difficult to get things done in the conference, right? Unequal revenue is one step closer to the conference breaking apart. Truth is, this conference probably is not lasting past the end of the contract anyway, at least not in its current form. Right now, there's nothing that the ACC can do to keep the football brands from feeling like they need to be somewhere else in order to compete at the stage that they want to compete at, right? This is going to be interesting to keep up with, because even if Clemson and Florida State and North Carolina, whoever else, if it is merit-based, at most you might see $5 to $10 million more per year than the rest of the people in your conference, based on playoff success, based on bowl game wins, based on, I guess, TV ratings. There's some other things, obviously NCAA tournament, et cetera. The other sports are going to count as well. This is going to be interesting to track. Thanks for listening to Winning Cures Everything. Make sure and follow me on Twitter @GaryWCE. If you want to toss in a question, you can email me, Gary@winningcureseverything.com. Make sure and hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you next time.